Oh, hello world. Welcome to Comic Book News. It's me, your old pal Dan Shaheen. Tonight, we're going to talk to a really, really cool cat. We're going to talk to Chuck Rozanski of Mile High Comics. He's been in this industry longer than I've been alive. Okay? He's sold more comics than I will ever hope to sell if I worked 100 years, a million years. I don't know that I could sell as many comics as this guy, and certainly not for the kind of beautiful, high-grade stuff that he's very well known for. Of course, I'm talking about Chuck Rozanski of Mile High Comics, and he's been on the show before. We had him on a panel. We talked briefly about comics retail. He gave some hot takes, man. He doesn't think like any other retailer I've ever talked to. Really differently, really outside of the box. I expected a lot of backlash from that or negative comments. He's also a controversial guy, an activist, a lot of things in his personal life that are considered controversial by some. I expected negativity of some sort. I got nothing but purely positive vibes from everybody, even like the usual suspects who sometimes are less than positive. Pretty amazing. I've been saving this one in my pocket for I don't know what, but I've been watching Chuck's feed on Facebook. Okay, he's a friend of mine there. He puts a lot of stuff about comics history. That stuff's all fascinating to me. It's really interesting. But man, he puts a lot of stuff about like what's going on the streets of Denver, the homeless people that are there. I mean, Chuck he's helping these people, not like just by like maybe donating money. He's out on the streets, distributing food, talking with these people, being friends, like acknowledging their humanity in a way that you don't often see. I really want to talk to him about that stuff. But of course, we want to talk to him about comics. We want to talk to him about retailing. We want to talk to him about his activism. We want to talk about his personal life. We want to talk about Betty Pages and what it's like to be a gender fluid person who's out and proud of it. So we're going to talk about all those things and a lot more. I mean, we already talked for like 20 minutes in the green room, and we scratched the tip of the iceberg. I can tell he's got a lot to say. So let's not waste any more time. Let's bring the man that you guys came to see, Chuck Rozanski of Mile High Comics. Hey, Chuck, welcome to Comic Book News.
Hey, thank you. Appreciate your having me.
Oh, thank you for making the time. I want to real quickly switch our background out here so that we can make sure that people get a chance. I'm going to pull us off for a second here and give us a chance to see the splendor. What I've got in my background here happens to be pictures. I asked you after our last interview, I said, man, Chuck, that picture behind you of all those boxes of comics, could you snap a couple pics for me? And I've used those again and again as a background here because, like, when you think of Wonderland of back issues, this is what I'm thinking about.
Well, that's one row, and what you see in that picture is 500,000 comics, because that's right about 1,600 long boxes. And if you go through my Jason Street store, I think there's five rows of those. We've sold some of the books out of the number system, but the number system right now is at 3.7 million singles. So if we've sold out 1 million, it's still 2.7 million singles that are there. And I take great pride in that, because you were mentioning while you were doing your intro that I've sold lots and lots of comics. And I don't really consider that to be a tremendous accolade, because pretty much anybody can sell comics. What I'm really proud of is that I've been able to hold on to so many. And to me, that's the singular achievement, is that, any fool can buy a bunch of comics and sell a bunch of comics. That's easy peasy. Okay, but if you buy a bunch of comics and you sell just a few of them, and then you get to keep the rest, and then you do that times 50 years, damn, then you're really getting somewhere. And so my goal is to breathe for another 30 years, I'm hoping, and watch all those comics in all those boxes behind you gradually get older and older and older. I actually don't ever want to sell them. I want them all to just sit there and just get older and be my friends, because comics are way better than people, because I've never had a comic book screw me over, never had a comic book betray me or lie to me or cheat me. And comics, as a general rule, don't steal themselves. So I'm a big fan of comics and tangible objects. So because they'll be your friends for a long time, as long as you keep them warm and dry.
Well, where did that start, Chuck? Tell me, what's the secret origin of Chuck Rozanski, comic collector or reader? Like, well, how do you think of yourself? Because, I know there's guys that sell comics that don't really know much about comics, don't read a lot of comics, aren't super interested in them. I don't sense that about you. Tell me your take on comics and what they mean to you and where that started.
Well, I read every comic that was being published in the late 1960s. And by every comic, I mean even kind of the offbeat stuff like Tower Comics. And I read Charlton. Yeah, sure. Everything that I could get. I was reading everything. I was a huge fan of Steve Ditko, learned to love Wally Wood. Eventually learned to love Jack Kirby. I didn't like him much in the beginning, but finally figured out that I was an idiot, and that Jack Kirby really was the king. And what I didn't know, and I didn't know this until I actually went to college, was that I was really, really poor. Up until that point in time, I thought that having $1 a month allowance was kind of like what everybody lived with. And it was completely out of my frame of reference that we were anything but just like ordinary middle-class people. And then I went to college and I found out that people were getting Porsches for Christmas and $500 a month living expenses. And it blew my mind, because I had been going to comic book shows by talking friends into driving me, or as a last resort, I actually hitchhiked to the Detroit Triple Fanfare in 1973 with my comics in a backpack and slept under bridges in the rain in order to get there. And then stayed with Jerry Bales, the founder of Comics Fandom, at his house. Jerry and Gene put me up. Jerry drove me into the show every day. But I just thought everybody did that kind of stuff. I had no idea that, skipping meals to buy comics was not something that everybody did. I've got it. Yeah. So
was that Denver though? That you grew up in? Is that
no? Germany. It was just south. It was about 100 miles south, down in Colorado Springs.
Okay, Colorado.
And I went to. I wasn't there that long, actually. I lived there for about 4 years, but during that time, I bought my first comic collection. I borrowed $140 from my mom, which I actually collateralized. I had savings already to that amount, and I gave her my savings bonds as collateral because that was our entire family fortune at that point. We were living very, very poor, and that $140 allowed me to buy 4,000 comics from this kid whose mom had worked at the local ID wholesaler in the front office, and they gave her free comics, and she took them home for this kid, and he sold them to me 3 cents a piece, and 6 cents for the 80-page giants and the annuals, and it came to $140. And it took me a year, but I by selling at the Colorado Springs Antiques Fair once a month, I was able to pay that back. But I did way more than that, because at the Antiques Fair, every Friday night during dealer setup, only dealers were allowed to be in there. And in those days, there was just classified ads, and then these kind of antique show, swap meets, flea market kind of things. And these guys would come in from places like Garden City, Kansas, and Canyon City, Colorado, down to the west of Pueblo. And they would bring in all the kinds of collectibles that they had found in their particular area. And a lot of times they would bring in things that I didn't have a lot of expertise in, but I saved them up, and then I would take them to shows. And so I did my first national show. I bought my first major collection when I was 14, set up my stand at the Antiques Fair that year. I did my first national show when I was just barely 17, which was Oklahoma City in 1972, which was really mind-blowing because I took in total transactions, $1,800 over a period of 3 days, which was more than my father made from his pension in 5 months. And
how much was a table at that show, or what?
I think it was $20. I just found my San Diego receipt. My first year, the next year, I went to. I had some friends drive me out, or a friend drive me out to San Diego, and at that show, I paid $40 for my first table at San Diego. And so in those days, though, I mean, I had to struggle. I was the last person to pay for a booth at San Diego in '73 because I had no money. And so my friend Bob Conway, who was also my very first back issue customer and is still a dear friend of mine, Bob borrowed his mom's car, and we drove all the way down to the Dallas show, which is kind of a famous show because that's the show where Harlan Ellison insulted the people of Texas so badly that they told him to never come back. He said that Lubbock was the asshole of the world and things like that. I mean, he was very forthright. And that's not to say anybody thought he was really wrong. It's just that Harlan could be really abrasive when he worked at it. And boy, he was in fine form that weekend. But anyway, I got stopped doing 106 in a 60s or in a 60 zone on the way down there. So Bob and I almost didn't make it. But it all worked out, and I made enough money at that show to pay for my San Diego booth. But that was the way everything was for me in the beginning. I made my money to open my first store when I was 19 years old because I got a lucky break. I had made friends with the guys who owned Middle Earth Publishing in Denver, which was at that time publishing a lot of really cool portfolios. And those who weren't born yet in those days have no cognition of how big a deal prints and portfolios, signed and numbered prints and portfolios were in the early and mid 1970s. Shanus and Shanus, in fact, which evolved into Pacific Comics, they started off as portfolio publishers, and they were very, very successful. But Middle Earth gave me the right to represent them at the '74 San Diego Con with the Barry Smith and the Frank Frazetta portfolios that they had just put out. And I got $4 out of 10 for every one I sold. And I sold 200 of those at the show, and that gave me my $800 that I used to open up the very first Mile High Comics store.
Wow.
But that was, it was kind of a miracle in those days to open a comic shop. There were a few lucky folks like the guys at Comics and Comics. You had Bud Plant and John Barrett and Bob Bierbaum, and all the other guys that were working with them. They opened up these stores, and they were very successful, but they had a big golden age find. And I only found this out recently. They had a big golden age find early on that helped them with capitalizing their company. And in 1977, I already had 3 stores, and I had been selling comics at that point for over 6 years, going 7 years. And that's the point at which I found the Edgar Church collection. And then that took the framework, the skeleton that I had built of the chain that I wanted to operate, and it turned it into a reality by allowing me to actually start funding some of the improvements that I was looking for. But had I not laid the groundwork in the first place, first of all, we would never have gotten the opportunity, the chance to purchase the Church collection.
Yes.
But then, in addition to that, what would I have done with it? That's there. If you read on my website, there's a little link. It's tiny, but it says Tales from the Database, and it's 170 columns that I wrote for the Comics Buyer's Guide about 10 years ago, and they were extremely popular because I was very forthright in those columns about the pluses and minuses of being 21 years old and suddenly being a millionaire, or at least having $1 million in comics. It is not always a blessing. Everybody is probably thinking in their minds, oh, he's full of shit. He's just downplaying this. No. It's like being the guy in baseball that beats Babe Ruth and then has an asterisk next to his name in the stats books, because everybody from that point forward says, oh yeah, but he wouldn't have been shit if he wouldn't have found that collection.
Yes.
And so there's always going to be that asterisk next to my name that's going to say, yeah, but could he have made it if he wouldn't have gotten dumb and lucky? And what I know in my heart of hearts is that I've tried to go bankrupt 50 times since then. And I have, and no, it's not a laughing matter. Seriously, I have had moment after moment after moment where if I would have made one wrong step, I would have been in the lake of fire. And I watched other people have that happen to them, where things would be going along really, really well, and suddenly some totally unforeseen circumstance would come along and wipe out decades of hard work and effort and leave them sometimes penniless.
Yes.
And who the hell wants to be known as the guy who had $1 million when they were 21 and pissed it all away? It is a burden. It is a curse. I'm telling you.
All right. It's an asterisk, Chuck, but what an asterisk. Tell us for a second, just who was this Edgar Church guy, and how did you make the connection? Did he seek you out, or did you have advertising that he responded to?
No. Edgar Church at that particular point in time was not, I want to use the word sentient, but that's not the right word. He was suffering from Alzheimer's, and he was in a nursing home, and his relatives were wanting to sell off everything that he had. And most importantly, they were wanting to sell the house. And what the realtor told me, and I'm just repeating what he said, the realtor said that the area was quickly becoming full of Mexicans, and they wanted to sell the house before the value dropped. And, the west side of Denver has always been sort of the area back in the 70s, back during that period of time. It was the barrio, very near to them. And there were some very powerful activists in Denver who were making a lot of waves. And eventually Federico Pena was elected mayor of Denver as a consequence of their activism. So there was some degree of validity of the concern that the church heirs had, that they had to move this house quickly. So the whole thing was, though, they were going to throw everything away. And so that was the big consideration. they first called another guy in Denver who had a big store, and he refused to go because he said he didn't make house calls. So then they called the science fiction bookstore where I had previously been subleasing space. And the young guy that ran the front counter who took the call passed the call on to my, at that time, girlfriend, Nanette, who was running my store for me because he had a crush on her. And so I got this magic phone number through so many different steps. And so I get the phone number, I call this realtor back, and the first thing he asks me is, what are you going to charge us to haul away all these comic books?
Uh-huh.
And I'm like, well, I don't charge people to haul away comic books. I said, how many do you have? And he said, well, we've got like a basement and there's a lot of comics in this basement. And I thought, well, Jesus, that's kind of crazy. I said, I can be there on Saturday. And he said, okay, come on by. And so I went there on Saturday, and they had me go downstairs. And when I went downstairs, I saw stacks of comics sitting on the floor. And they were all these like 1950s and maybe some late 40s stuff. But the conditions on them were not very good. A lot of them were in VG fine. I mean, they were terrible. But bear in mind, this is 1977. And so these comics were at that point only 20 years old. So it would be kind of the equivalent today of going into a house and seeing a whole bunch of Bronze Age Marvels and DCs. It's like, yeah,
Sure.
okay, these are nice, but no big deal. I don't really care.
Right.
You know, and, you know, so what are we talking about here? I said, you know, there's some older books here because I saw some of the early ECs in there and they were in lower grade. But, you know, when you're looking at ECs, Weird Science, Weird you know, the Cryptoterror and things like that, it's like, you know, would you like me to carry these for you guys on consignment? And they were like, nope, we want cash, we want it now. And so, you know, make us an offer and get them out of here. And so I took a look at them and I made them an offer, and they said, fine, but you also have to take the ones that are in the closet at the same price. And that was the moment at which I said, what closet? What the hell are you talking about? And they opened up this closet, and there's pictures of the closet now on the internet because somebody actually got in there before they ripped it all out, because now it's been remodeled and changed. And thankfully, they didn't actually tear the house down, because a lot of those older craftsman houses in that neighborhood have now been torn down. The city of Denver is allowing builders to put in 3 to 5 units where one of those craftsman houses stood. But Edgar Church's house is still down there. And but anyway, they opened up this closet, and I saw stacks of comics, and they were all the way up into the rafters. Church had padlocked this, and they had cut the padlock in order to get the room open. And all I saw when they opened the room was thick-looking books that were white. And it was at that point that I asked them for a glass of water. And they gave me a glass of water, and I'm staring at these comics. And I go to drink the glass of water, and I pour it right down my shirt. But other than that, I stayed really, really cool. And I said, okay, well, I'll take these too. And then I pulled my van. Now, the story with my van, I mean, I had had some hard times, and particularly I had just done a show in Wichita, Kansas, and the show in Wichita, Kansas was horrible. It was the week between Christmas and New Year's, and we had maybe 70 people show up over 3 days, but one person was a guy who had just been laid off from Beach Aircraft that had a big giant plant there that built planes. And he decided that he was going to invest all of his money in comic books. And he came to me, and I had just by sheer coincidence purchased a complete Mad Run. And he bought that whole Mad Run. I ended up making $1,100 off of him for the Mad Run, and then a bunch of other stuff that I had. Now, this is prior to the Church deal. But
okay,
okay, where this ties in with the church deal is that on the way home, this is between Christmas and New Year's, on the way home, I run into this blizzard and it's just freezing brick cold. And I don't check my oil. And my engine ends up seizing up out in the middle of the flatlands of Kansas where it's just brick cold. And I walk to these people's farmhouse. It's the only thing that I can see. And I knock on the door and I say, hey, my van broke down. And they said, what happened? And I said, well, I ran it out of oil. And they said, what kind of oil do you use? And I said, 1030. And they said, we got a case right here. And so I put the oil in the van, drove home, but the van was funny after that. And then the transmission went out. And so then, this is the third week of January, I get the call from the church realtor, and he wants me to come down there. Well, my van at that point wasn't going into drive. So I had to drive the highway at 35 miles an hour with my flashers on in order to get down to the church house.
Oh, like in third or okay.
Second. I was in second the whole way from Boulder to Denver, which is 30 miles.
Oh my gosh.
I'm on the freeway riding in the slow lane with my flashers on. All right. I get to the church house. And again, it's freezing fucking cold out there. And I get to the church house and they have me pull in the alley. And the first thing I see in the alley is this mountain of boxes that are filled with artwork. They're throwing away all of his theft files, because in those days you couldn't just go into clipart.com. You had to have your own imagery to borrow from and to inspire you. And Church had cut up magazines for 50 years and filled all these legal boxes with all these wonderful clippings. And when I got into the back alley to start loading comics, I saw it was about 30 feet long, 5 feet high, and about 3 stacks deep. And this was the reason why they called me, was that they had been throwing his stuff out for so long. They had been getting huge extra bills from the landfill, from the garbage people, to haul this stuff off to the landfill.
Oh my God.
So I was their wet dream, because here I was not only not charging them, I was paying them. And, you know, I have been pilloried throughout my lifetime for, oh my God, you ripped off these poor, starving people, and you are such a prick, and you will be crucified someday in hell upside down and in cow shit. Okay, but, you know, fuck you all. I was there. I know the circumstances, and they made out like bandits. Okay, because I went back after that, and I begged them to not throw anything else away. And I took people like Bruce Hamilton there, and they had a whole bunch of Edgar Church's, like the dime novel type stuff from the 1880s, 1890s, the Buffalo Bill weeklies and things like that. Bruce gave him over $1,000 for what he got. I took people there that bought the pulp magazines. They gave several $1,000s. You know, we went in there and we just
I see. You brought other people to him to buy the stuff that they were ready to pay you to haul away. They were paying somebody to throw away.
Right. And I brought in other people that were willing to pay money in order to give they ended up making a freaking fortune out of this stuff. Now, did I come out great? Oh, hell yeah. I came out really, really well, because I mean, not only is it the largest collection of Golden Age comics ever found, but actually I was told by the BBC that as regards collectibles, it's the most valuable collectible haul today. It wasn't at the time that I found it, but if you were to have valued it, and this BBC thing was about 12, 15 years ago, they said that except for like finding the Atocha and all the gold and silver bullion that was on the Atocha, this was the next best discovery, because they valued it at that point at over $100 million.
Wow.
Now, I didn't get that kind of money out of it. Jesus Christ! By the time 1985 had rolled around, I had liquidated most of it and used the money to try and shore up and build up Mile High Comics. And if you look behind you in that wonderful little screenshot you have right there of all them funny books, you know, I converted big ones into little ones, and I just did it a lot. And that's why I have 10 million little ones now who are my friends. And, you know, the difference is that, you know, I sold all that church stuff, and in doing so, I reinvigorated the entire interest and marketplace for Golden Age comics in the late 1970s and early 1980s. And I took what had been kind of, I can't really say it was stagnating, but it wasn't doing great. And all of a sudden, everybody wanted a Holy Grail. Everybody wanted one of the Mile High books. And it wasn't until a few years later that Edgar Church's name even came up in the conversation. But it didn't matter to me. Okay, my goal was, and I will tell you a truth, okay? After I found that collection, I lost all my friends. Everyone. And that included Jerry Bales. Remember I told you earlier I hitchhiked to Detroit and stayed at Jerry and Jean's house? Yeah. I've been looking for the letter because I've been doing, I just had my operation and I've been staying at home and sorting through my archives. But I got a letter from Jerry Bales shortly after I published the very first catalog of the Edgar Church collection. And he told me that he would never speak to me again. He said that I had become his worst enemy. I had become one of those conniving profiteers who only saw comics as a means to financial end, and that he just never wanted to see or hear from me again. And we never spoke till the day he died. And but Jerry was just one person. There were those who were envious. And then there were those who just thought that philosophically that I was that I had become corrupted, like Jerry did, and just a terrible human being. Yeah. And there were those who believed the lies. You know, the lies that I had taken advantage, when the truth of the matter is I created a great benefit for folks. Yeah. And I ended up saving. If you go online now and you see artwork by Edgar Church being auctioned on eBay, which is fairly common now, every single one of those pieces was saved by me. Yeah. Because I went into that alley and I tried to grab what I could. But see, I couldn't take snow-covered legal boxes and put them on top of mint Golden Age. That would have been really dumb. Yeah. And so my van was pretty big, okay, but there were so many comics. It was over 18,000 books that it took me 2 trips. So I had to get them that one Saturday, and then I had to wait a week and go back the next Saturday. And that was the hardest week in my life because I didn't know, none of the books were sorted. Nothing was cataloged. Yeah, right. Okay, so when I got back after the first trip, I had taken all the stuff that was sitting on the floor first because they wanted that mess, they called it, out of their way. Okay, and those were all the stacks of things like ECs and, you know, all the 1950s love and Western comics and so on that weren't even worth in those days $2. I mean, it was a stretch to call them $2. But I only took a small portion of the comics that were in the closet in that first trip. And the small portion that I took, though, as I recall, the key book that I saw was like Batman #1 was in the first haul. Oh, so that begged the question, what the hell is in the rest of that closet? I have no clue. Okay, but here's the thing. I was out of money. And I hadn't paid a huge amount on these comics, but I paid all the money that I had in the world. And so I went to a friend of mine and got him to cash out a CD with the promise that I would then sell him books for 40% of 1976 Overstreet. Okay. And he ended up in exchange for that $10,000 CD, he ended up making over $250,000.
Wow.
So I wasn't the only one who came out well as regards this collection. But see, that's what you do, is if you don't have any money, which I didn't have, then you go ahead and you give somebody else a piece of the action and share. And so he took on the risk of giving me that money. And I came back and I said, okay, here you go. You pick what you want to pick. And, that's what life is about, is doing your damnedest to be fair. And so ever since then, even to this day, if you want to jump fast forward and go forward 43 years from that deal, now I'm out in the streets helping people that are that have addiction problems, that are strung out on heroin and strung out on meth, and I'm helping to bring. Until I had to have my operation, I was actually delivering over 2,000 pounds of food a week, as well as blankets and gloves and sleeping bags, but I was doing this all alone because the areas that I go into are controlled by gangs and by dealers, and they're incredibly dangerous. But one of the advantages that I have is that since I was so poor when I was young and I was having to do all this hitchhiking, I mostly got myself out of trouble pretty well in those days. I did get sexually assaulted one time, and that was bad. But things happen. Things happen in life, and it teaches you that, first of all, that there's risks, and second of all, that if things go badly, you'll survive. You just got to pick yourself up and move forward. And so things happen. But at the same time, you can't judge others who haven't been able to pick themselves up. And so right now, I'm in this really kind of strange position where if I sold one row of those comics that you have as your backdrop right now, I'd never have to work again for the rest of my life. I could sell my building, which actually is where most of my value is right now. My building has increased in value by $6 million since I bought it 9 years ago. And so I don't have to work anymore. And I do this now because it's my passion and because I really, really care. And I love being able to help comic fans around the world with their collections. But at the same time, I also really like buying more comics because, well, I'm a hoarder. And I got a really great compliment from someone the other day. They said that, Chuck, you're really kind of a crazy ass hoarder, but you're a high functioning hoarder. You sell just enough shit so you can buy more. Okay?
Right.
And that kind of,
Well, let's talk about that for a second. So you took that mile, you took all if money is your energy, you took all your energy and you bought the Edgar Church collection, but it was a store of potential energy. Like, it was rocket fuel that you now could use to build your business. And man, there have been a lot of iterations of what Mile High Comics like as a business and as a retail concern. Can you take us just quickly maybe through the evolution of where you went from being a dealer of old comics into having retail stores, having fancy expensive retail locations, to getting back to owning your own property and turning it into a little something different? Can you tell us just about your retail journey?
Well, I started off with zero money. So initially, it was just quite literally my mother driving me down in her old Chevy to the Antiques Fair in Colorado Springs. And so once a month, I would set up down there. And then eventually I got my driver's license. Then I could drive myself. And then I opened up the first store when I was 19. I had the 3 stores when I found the church collection, and I quickly traded some of the church books for a 4th store. But then the really big change that happened was that had an ex-employee who was working for Richard Alf out in San Diego. And Alf was one of the people who was a small-time player in the mail order business. He was running classified ads in Marvel. And that didn't really count for much because there were about 15 or 20 people that were running ads on a fairly regular basis. And Howard Rogowski, Robert Bell, Passaic, Comic Sales Corp, they were kind of the big players. And, Alf and Santee Comics and God knows what. They were all kind of the
Hey, Chuck,
the
if I could for a
also-rans.
second, one quick question. Just said you brought that up. I've seen your ads in Marvel Comics and those ads that you're talking about for all those years. What did it
Right.
cost back in those days for you to run an ad like that in a Marvel comic? Like, what were you
Well, I can
spending?
give you two answers to that. Okay.
Yeah.
The first answer is just the cut and dried, really simple answer, which is that it cost me $22,000 up front for 2 pages for 2 months. So that would have been $5,500 a page. Okay. But notice I used the word up front. They were not going to give me billing. They were not going to give me credit. So I actually paid $1 million for those ads. Probably way more than $1 million, probably more like $10 million for that first ad. Why? How do I possibly extrapolate that? Well, it comes down to Steve Geppe's pool table. And that is that once upon a time, I needed $22,000 in order to prove out a theory that Alf had given me. And this goes back to what the conversation started. So Richard Alf had this little mail order business, and he wanted to sell it out because he wanted to go off and do real estate. And he was selling his comic store at the same time, and he wasn't going to sell the comic store unless he sold the mail order. So I was integral to the whole equation. I had done mail order before really badly. I do great at running ads and collecting checks and not so great on shipping stuff. So this is a personal failing, not a company failing. Okay, the company,
Okay.
we do great. Okay, but we do great because I bought out Richard Alf because he had really great tracking systems and systems. He had packaging systems. And so when I bought him out, I didn't hardly get anything in the way of comics, but I got really great ideas and procedures. And so I gave him $20,000 for that. But he threw in a bonus. And the bonus was that he had run a little classified ad in Marvel where he had actually listed some comic books for sale. He said he was buried in orders. And he told me, he said, Chuck, when you buy me out, what you have to do is you have to run a full page ad. He said, whatever it takes, he said, you got to do this because he said, this is going to be incredible. And I believed him. I looked at the stats that he showed me, and he had paid something like $50 for this classified ad and had taken in $2,000. And I said, fuck, yeah, this looks like it really could work. So I went to New York and I schmoozed Marvel, and they did not want me. They had done some studies and they found that the ads were the least liked thing in their books. And they really wanted their books to no longer be all crappy and ugly. And Jim Galton had just joined Marvel from Scholastic, and he was determined to try and improve the look and feel of the books. So my ads were the last thing they wanted. So they made me a deal. To get rid of me, they said, okay, young man, because I was 25 then. They said, you come back with $22,000 in cash and we'll run your little comic book ad. And so I called up Steve and I flew to Baltimore and I gave him Batman 1. I gave him All-Star 8. I gave him Sensation #1. And that was just the beginning. It was a stack of books that was probably 6 inches deep. All keys. Whiz 2. Start thinking about how much these books go for now if they were graded 9.6, 9.8, and they were stuck.
And that's what you're talking about, that type of grade on those books? These
were the church books.
Yeah.
And they had never been out. But I needed $22,000. And Steve was the money man in those days. And some of his money was coming from John Snyder. But it didn't really matter where it was coming from. I didn't care. I went to his house. We sat down at the pool table, laid out the comics, He wrote me a check for 22 grand, and I gave it to Jesse Rosen over at Kalish, Quigley, and Rosen, the Marvel ad agency. And I bought myself a double page in Marvel Comics, not knowing if it would do jack or shit.
Right.
And I gave up so many key books. Literally, those books today would be worth $10 million.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. I'm trying to add that up in my head, and I'm not even getting there. I can't even fathom those books.
I think the Detective 27 was part of that deal too.
Oh my gosh.
It was crazy. It was crazy. Bear in mind, I did this deal in 1980, and those books were just not that much money in those days.
Yeah, right.
You know, they just weren't.
So Steve bought them. He wrote you that check, and they're his now, I assume, or he sold them or whatever. They're in the Jeppy Museum. They're somewhere.
No. They all moved on because I think a lot of them went to Snyder, and Snyder flipped everything. That's the thing. He didn't hold on to stuff, and so he was a transactionalist. And I've been a transactionalist. I understand that, but he's suffered a lot of regret for having flipped everything that he ever got, because at one point he had the Action one and the Marvel one that went to Anderson, and he's been beating himself up ever since. But that's life. Life is moving on and doing things. I wanted to change the world. The church books sitting in my safety deposit box created no benefit for anybody but me. Okay, and that benefit really and truly was just simply one of avarice. And what I saw in them was the ability to change the world. And by God, I did. Jim Lee, right now, president of DC Comics, got hooked because he saw my first Marvel ad, because he showed it to his mom, who had been dissing him about collecting and reading comics. And he said, look, this one's worth $5. All of a sudden, the light bulb went off, and his mom backed him up. Okay. And who told me this story? Jim Lee. Okay. Yeah. And Jim Lee's not the only one. I've heard this same story from hundreds, thousands of people who say that my little ads, where I had columns and columns of prices for what comics were ostensibly listing for, they changed the world. They changed
sort of legitimized. Yeah.
It monetized the boxes that everybody had under their bed and in their garage and in their closet. And it suddenly put a monetary value on what had previously been just reading material. And people were comic aficionados. But this suddenly created the whole investment market, and it made it very public. So in other words, before, in the late 70s, you had your guys like Bill Tailing and Irving Bigman, who came in from real estate and started dealing timelies and had tons of timelies. And, you had your guys who were buying and selling your big books, your Russ Cochran and your Burl Rose and Bruce Hamilton. But it wasn't an egalitarian system. The Marvel and DC market was okay in those days, and Robert Bell had done a lot to get that going, and certainly the Overstreet had done a lot to get it going. But my ads were the gasoline on the embers, and really blew it up. And see, now that's where the Edgar Church collection and my buying it, I was the right person at the right time, because I had no desire to just sit on those books. All these fanboys who have these wet dreams about having, the world's greatest comics locked away where they can show that theirs is bigger than anybody else's. That is not my dream. My dream is to try and do positive things. I get up every day with the thought that maybe today I can actually do something that is going to create good in the world and give some useful reason for me to be breathing air and to be taking up resources. And that's not a widely held belief, actually. And so
so tell me a little bit about your activism. Tell me a little bit about the things that you've tried to do. You've tried to take some of this this energy, as I like to call it. I mean, I think of money really as more like a force of nature, like gravity, like it or not, it affects so many things around us. So you chose to take some of this money and some of the lucky breaks that you've gotten and try and help some other people. So tell me a little bit about your efforts in activism.
Well, I want to backtrack just a little bit.
Yeah,
a
sure.
lot of my activism is actually based in the same kind of poverty that I had when I was a teen. To the extent, I'll just give you a case in point. When I went, and I've been several times now, to the United States Supreme Court to be an activist for transgender rights, I did that on my own. I held little signs that I paid fast signs to print out for me for $24. And I was already in town for other reasons. So the activism that I did there for social consciousness in this particular instance, that was not based in any kind of monetary consideration whatsoever. That was me just acting on my own with an absolute minimal expenditure of financial resources, but taking a huge risk because, when you're getting up at 6 a.m. and putting on makeup and a gown and high heels, and then walking through the snow to stand on the steps of the Supreme Court, that takes a certain amount of visceral dedication that money can't buy. And so I do a lot with money as regards giving away money. I try not to give away large sums of money like a Bill Gates or somebody like that, because honestly, most all my money's tied up in comic books and nobody wants them to, like out on the streets. But what I do is I try to act as a leader. I try to set an example, and I say, okay, I can give $100. Can you give $5? Because that $100 to me is probably the equivalent in terms of how it impacts my budget as a $5 bill is to you.
Right.
But your $5 bill can buy 2 sandwiches, and that's 2 people that are going to have something to eat today that otherwise might not. And so I try to, I try to lead and to show people how everyone has the capacity to do good in the world and to create betterment. And, when I go out in the streets, one of the guys that I worked with disappeared for a couple of days, and then he came back, and his car had like 30 bullet holes in it from where they had tried to murder him. And these are not hypotheticals. When I'm out there on the streets, I talk about working around gangbangers. My operation came at a good time because I got in crossways with a couple of people who were not happy with me, and they were the wrong kind of people to get crossways with. Out on the street, there is no law. You can forget about the police. The only time the police show up is to take people's stuff away.
Yeah, right.
But for the homeless community, it's a world that's dominated by violence and by people that are used to getting their way through threats and intimidation. And when those don't work, they get out the guns. This guy had 50 caliber bullet holes in the back of his car. The police were blown away.
It's like a Desert Eagle. We're talking that's
it had a hole the size of a quarter. Yeah. So
so tell me though, in these situations, have you seen this problem getting better or worse? Let's say over the past, I don't know, 4 years, question. Let's say.
No, it's getting much, much worse. And the bad part is, and this is what I have to deal with a lot, is I deal with a lot of vulnerable elderly women who are alcoholics or who are addicted to other substances, and I'm trying to keep them alive. One of my clients died about 6 weeks ago, and then having to do grief counseling for all the others who see themselves in that same body bag just at any time now, and then dealing with police that are coming in as the stormtroopers for the city and stealing everybody's stuff because they find the homeless inconvenient. But where the growth is coming from is from newly unhoused people. And those
Yes.
people are innocents. It's like going to prison, effectively living on the streets as a homeless person. Effectively puts you like in being the new kid in the prison yard. You got to make alliances fast, and you've got to figure out where resources are available, where you can get food, where you can get medical care,
Yeah.
where you might be able to get a motel room when it drops to 5 below. Who has resources? Where can you get a blanket? And then also, who the hell is going to be there to hold you when you cry? Because the despair is enormous.
Yeah.
And
Well,
so
Chuck, and I'll say this too, though. In prison, at least you got 3 hots and a cot, and there's some guards and stuff there too. Like out on the streets, wherever where there is just rule of by violence, it's almost worse than prison in some ways.
well, a lot of the guys from prison are there, and there are no guards, as you say. But see, like with COVID, and we really should talk about that in the comics industry at some point here.
Yeah,
But
that's coming up next.
okay, but with COVID, you've got the Denver County Jail has released all these people, and a lot of them are alpha males who are really, really dangerous. And so, when I'm out there, obviously, I try to take care of the transgender girls, for example. They cannot stay in a traditional shelter, so they're sleeping in parks and up against brick walls, hoping that they can keep the rain off of them. And it's just dangerous as hell. I mean, rape is like so commonplace that people don't even talk about it. It's not even something, you can't even file it, and that's both male and female rape.
Okay.
Sexual violence is a constancy out there. Hunger is a constancy. I mean, I personally have saved lives from people who were dying of hypothermia back in September because we had a freak snowstorm show up in the first week of September, and some of my clients had no winter gear at all. I made 3 trips out that night. I took every single donation I had in the warehouse. I was passing out pants, I was passing out jackets, I was passing out sleeping bags, trying to keep people alive because the city itself did absolutely nothing. And I help the people that are not the most degenerate. I mean, it just brought me to tears because on the way back to the warehouse after my 3rd trip, I saw about 20 or 25 people huddled up against brick walls with snow all around them. And these are people that are the bad addicts. The people that I deal with are still marginally functional, but there are people who have been addicted for so long that their brains are just dead. And there's women amongst them. And you haven't seen degradation until you've seen a woman so wasted that she pulls down her pants and pees up against a wall in the middle of daytime, with everybody standing around her, and it's so commonplace. But these people are so damaged from years and years of oxy and God knows what, that I just try to bring them food. That's all. And when I have them to spare, I try to bring them blankets. And I'm so glad I had this operation so that I could take some time off, because I was really starting to crumble. Because and you see the new people come on the street, and you see them, if you've ever watched the movie The Harder They Come with Jimmy Cliff, when he comes out of the when he first comes to Kingston, first thing that happens to him is he gets all his stuff ripped off. And that's exactly what I see in the parks and in the alleys and at the homeless shelters, is that the poor prey upon the poor. And so the newbies get everything they have ripped off. Then they lose their ID. And when you lose your ID, then you're in a nightmare, because then you can't get assistance and you can't get medical care. And so, yeah, I deal with this shit all the time. Yeah. So the comics that I'm selling these days, a lot of the money that I take in goes to help fund the charitable efforts, the altruistic efforts that I do. I blessedly have a great team and a wife who keeps me grounded and who reminds me that I can help, but I can't bankrupt us. So I always keep in mind that for me to do my altruistic work well, I also have to do my comics retailing well. I have to make sure that I tend to business first and then go out and help people.
Okay.
But that is my main goal.
So let's bring it back to retailing again.
Okay.
That was I mean, that is tragic stuff, and I don't want to make light of it or say that like retailers are just as bad as the people you're helping on the streets of Denver, but retailers are suffering too, right? We've got a pandemic going on. We've got people forcing to shut down their businesses. People who were, frankly, I'm going to think, in your opinion, maybe overly reliant on the cycle of weekly new comics.
Well, yeah, of course. That was when I was on the panel that you had about 4 months ago. That really was my argument back then. And I think a great deal of it still holds true. We've seen some very interesting sales numbers, especially on DC product recently. And, when you're seeing books that are selling in the hundreds of thousands, there were many monthly diamond reports where there were no books that broke 100 or just barely broke 100,000 over the last few years. So to see some books right now selling really substantial numbers, that is a really good thing. And what I'm seeing myself is that there's some degree of revival in reading in general as a result of COVID, because
I
people
think
are
you're
locked
right.
down so much. Yeah, they're running out of streaming shows because so many shows are in hiatus right now or are producing on a very limited basis. People have been mining HBO and Netflix and going back, and they've been looking at all this stuff. And at a certain point in time, you start to say to yourself, well, really, an awful lot of these programs that I'm watching originated as graphic novels or as comic series, and maybe I should go back to the original source material. And so we're seeing an inordinate growth right now in back issue sales that are being fueled by people coming back that had maybe been distracted by the world and the absolute cornucopia of entertainment options that existed a year ago. Now they don't exist to the same extent, and I'm seeing some bookstores are doing well, but it's a really mixed bag. Amazon obviously is selling a lot of books and they're doing well, but we're seeing just sort of all kinds of different reactions. But the stores that were most reliant on weekly new comic sales, I think, are the ones that are in the most financial difficulties now. And many of them have already gone out because when Diamond shut down, that shut down a key element of their revenue stream. The ones that did make it through the shutdown are now walking wounded because they're functioning, but all of them are scrambling to cover that Diamond check because they owe back rent. During the period of time that they were shut down, and this obviously isn't everywhere. There's states in the union that didn't shut down at all, but a lot of the big population centers, California shut down for a long period of time, New York shut down for a long period of time, Colorado shut down for a long period of time, and those guys dug themselves a hole. Whatever working capital reserves that they had, a lot of those reserves have now been expended, and they're living from shipment to shipment. And that makes life very difficult because with the way that things are looking right now, Colorado on Friday had its highest day ever. And according to the criteria that the state laid out when we reopened back in May, we're supposed to be shut down right now. Non-essential businesses are supposed to be closed, and they haven't even closed restaurants or bars yet, but they have to, because if this keeps expanding the way that it's expanding, the mother of one of my dear friends died 3 nights ago from COVID. And I think everybody is being touched now. I mean, you can't lose 250,000 Americans and not have it reach into damn near every household in America. And
Absolutely.
so if they're projecting now that this is going to get a lot worse, then okay, what is this going to do to comic book retailers who already have blown all their reserves if they are shut down, forced to shut down again? I mean, right now
Yeah.
we're teetering on the edge.
And not to mention how many of the successful retailers that are out there are older folks, closer to retirement anyway. So, like, if you're going to recover from this thing, there's going to be a long road ahead to pay back loans or whatever. If you were able to get, for instance, a government loan, you still got to pay it back or borrow money from wherever. And I just feel like there have been a number of retailers that were so close to retiring or closing anyway that they just used this as a reason. This was just the reason why. No way am I going to, let this take another 20 years out of my life as far as what I'm going to have to do just to dig out of this hole. So,
well, I think that's a fairly common perspective right now.
yeah.
I'll tell you what we did, which is maybe someday going to come back and bite us in the ass. But since at this point I'm arguably independently wealthy, I can do it my own way and follow my own belief system. And we stopped carrying new comics on the rack. When I spoke in that panel 4 months ago, and I said that new comics were a death trap, because when you buy them and you put them out on the rack, you're gambling that someone will come along and then want to buy those from you.
Yes.
There's no guarantee. And if
Yes.
you eat them, the residual value on them is very hard to derive after the fact. And so I operate right now the largest comic book store in the world. We have 40,000 square feet of retail space. And when you come in on a Wednesday, you better get there in the morning, because even on big titles like Batman, we might have 5 to 10 copies for on the rack.
Wow.
My diamond bills used to be 60,000 a week, and now they're 6. Okay, and the thing is, I got to tell you, we are prospering right now, because what we're doing is we're treating the store as a pop culture recycling center. So we're buying things like Funko Pop figures and G.I. Joe and Godzilla. And, so we've got a Denver metropolitan area that has 2.5 million people living in it. And all of them know that if they need to move, that we're the buyer of last resort. Yeah. You can bring in whatever you have. We don't really care. Game of Thrones, Pokemon, whatever in the hell you have, we're going to be interested in buying it, but we buy it at a price. And the reason is because, first of all, we got to pay for 40,000 square feet, but also we have to sit on stuff a lot of times for 2, 3, 5 years while we wait for somebody to come in and buy that incredibly rare Zippo lighter that you have. It could be a long time before somebody comes in and wants to give us real money. So by acting as a pop culture recycling center, we control our own destiny. And what I mean by that is that we essentially, and I'm speaking carefully here, because we didn't actually tell anybody to get the fuck out. All right? We didn't quite go that far. Okay? But what we said was, maybe your new comic needs could be met somewhere else. Now think about that for a second. Name one other comic book retailer in America who has told their new comic buyers to mosey on off to Buffalo. The thing is, we do offer our subscription service, and that's why we're still buying $6,000 a week, $10,000 a week, some from Diamond. If you are willing to take the risk off of me, I'm your guy. You come in, we will be like clockwork. You can walk in the store, pick up your brick of new comics, be out the door in 15 seconds, and you don't have to worry your pretty little head about anything. But don't ask me to buy them on spec and take all the risk that you might or might not want them. It doesn't work. The economics of that are dreadful. So I actually, after our panel last time, made a dictum. And the dictum was sell out on Wednesday.
So tell me though, how do you, I mean, to make subscriptions work now, to many, that's not a no risk proposition because they don't have the systems in place. So are you able to have a no risk system of prepayment or credit cards? And yes, right. So that's key to that scenario. And I believe a lot of retailers don't either have the technical savvy or
the balls,
the willpower to do it.
No. Most retailers allow themselves to be bullied by their customers.
Mm-hmm.
I see it all the time.
Yeah.
Okay. And their customers tell them how they should operate their business. And that's one of the problems with a smaller store, is that you have a limited clientele, customer base. You get to like them a lot. And then you make the biggest mistake that you can make, which is that you start lending people money.
Yeah.
And you're not doing it directly. What you're doing is you're buying comics for them that they can't pay for. Yes. And then they get more and more and more behind to you. And pretty soon your very best friend in the comic book world becomes your debtor. And you are their creditor. And it destroys the relationship. And they leave you for someone who is not going to treat them so onerously.
Yes.
I have seen this happen so many times over the last 50 years. Yeah. And so the best thing in the world is to have a really straight up great relationship with everybody, which is if your credit card doesn't clear, if you haven't bothered to update your expiration date, your books are on the rack on Wednesday morning. If you come in, good, great, okay? But we are not going to be your bankers. We are not going to buy comics hoping that you're going to buy them from us. This is a very cut and dried thing. We'll give you 10, 15, 20% off on your comics. We'll gladly give you a discount, but you will have either a credit card on file or you will actually pay us in advance. And that way it's a no risk proposition. When I get comics in, we know that they're going to generate revenue for us and that they're not going to cost us money. The vast majority of comic book retailers cannot say that. And yet they're afraid of their customers. They're afraid of saying no. They're afraid of saying, I'm not taking this risk anymore. This risk is now on you. Love you, but when comic books are $5 to $10 a piece and the residual value on them is a quarter, I can't afford to be sitting there and buying hundreds and thousands of copies. I've seen people in this business that have generated vast amounts of revenue and they've screwed themselves because, they don't look at sell-through is the most critical thing that you can be looking at all the time. And I remember the last Diamond conference I went to was in '93, and that's a story in and of itself. That was such a shit show. But I went to that Diamond conference, and we were actually asked to give a presentation on sell-through. And in those days, we ordered a lot more speculatively because comics were only $1. That was when the cover price was $1. Our cost on them was 43 cents. And we still saw ways to lose money. But our typical sell-through in those days was, I think we were running between 93 and 95% in those days. So on a bad month, we'd be down in the low 90s. But we asked the audience at this Diamond seminar, so tell us who's selling at least 50% of the books that they're getting each month. And only half of the hands in the room went up.
So they're losing money every month, in other words, basically.
Well, they were all living the dream, which is if we don't sell them new, we're going to sell them as back issues, so we don't care. And that's why if you go back and you're buying out liquidation deals, you get all this early 90s stuff because all these retailers were thinking that the comics on their shelves were money when the comics on their shelves were actually a carrying cost liability and they didn't recognize or see it. And so you had so many bankruptcies in 93, 94, 95 from all these people that bought vast amounts of new comics thinking that, they'd put their kids through college, and instead they lost their house. Yeah. Because, the folks at the Diamond Credit Department are not known for their kindness.
Well, on the other hand, though, there have been those that said that Diamond has been too generous with credit over the years, and maybe
they carried me.
Stores.
They carried me. I mean, at one point, I owed Diamond $1 million. Okay, and they were really nervous, and they really didn't like it. But that expression "too big to fail."
Yes.
Yes. We actually started getting a lot more shit from Diamond when we owed them less than $100,000 than when we owed them $1 million. But it did teach me the lesson, okay, which is that, first of all, you meet your commitments. I mean, we paid it. I mean, we paid the money. I earned it. I figured out ways to make it. But also, you don't let your customers coerce you into taking risks that you shouldn't be taking. It's your business. And if your customers are going to be demanding that from you, then that's where that conversation comes from that I alluded to earlier, where it's just like, I can't help you. There are other shops in town, and God bless you. If they want to take the risk to serve you in the way that you're seeking to be served, then go. But if you ever want great service and you want guaranteed books, we provide that service, but we will not buy speculatively. And so, with COVID, I think that's what's going to put people out of business.
Yes. Oh, yeah. Well, so what I've heard actually from a couple of my retailer pals is they're like, look, since we know that this foot traffic is non-existent or lowered, I did lower my orders to like Chuck style ordering, like you're suggesting. And they're like, oh my gosh, I'm making more money than I made before.
We've been killing during COVID because we also stopped replacing staff, because we, like most people, got some PPE money and we used it exactly like we were supposed to. So we're eligible for the forgiveness on that loan. But we maintained staff all through the initial shutdowns. But then since then, we haven't laid anyone off. But if anyone left, we didn't replace them. And so, some of my staff have been feeling kind of stressed because they've been having to do double duty in certain areas. But with Colorado having its highest point last Friday, we're teetering on the edge of another shutdown here. And the point that I make is that I don't want to hire somebody this week and lay them off next week, because there's not going to be another round of PPE the way that things are looking right now. And so if we lose the retail store revenue portion of our equation, then there's going to be some real difficult decisions that are going to have to be made. But for the time being, while the store is still open, right now, we're not advertising. We're not running any of our like tournaments or drag shows or auctions or any of that kind of stuff. And we're still coming in at 80% of pre-COVID revenues. And that's without tourists. I mean, the Denver Convention Center is shut down, and that used to be a huge source of business for us. Yeah. People coming in nationally and internationally. Our international business is basically gone, and we're still running at 80%. Damn, dude, I'm happy.
And costs going down, I guess. I mean, if you're not staff, right? So there you go.
Yeah. So we're figuring out ways to prosper. And then something that I alluded to when earlier on, before we came on, our back issue sales right now are really solid, and our prices are not low. In a lot of instances, our prices are pretty high. But there's something that has transpired, which is that so many people have liquidated their back stock over the years, not necessarily through COVID, but just in general, that we have the last kind of remaining supply of books that are 30, 40 years old. And I have millions of them. And that's what I was talking about earlier, where I said that, any fool can buy comics and sell comics. That's no big trick. Okay. But keeping a hold of millions and millions of comics, so far, I'm the only one who's managed to pull that off.
Well, and the distinction here, because it's a little bit conflicting sort of with what with what you said, but I think I see the difference here. Is you're saying don't buy your comics new at a low margin and keep them around. That's going to kill you. But if you can buy them low enough with a high enough margin and sell the ones at high margin, then you can keep your inventory growing and still be profitable and make money.
Correct. And what we do when we're buying a collection, and I am very upfront with all the people that I buy from, it's very simple. You know, you come to me with a long box of comics. If I can see 5 or 10 books in there that are going to pay for the cost of the long box, then I'll buy it. I'll sell those 5 or 10 and throw the rest in the back. And we do sort through those books regularly and add them into inventory, but we have no motivation to sell them. You know, we sold the 5 or 10 that we had to sell in order to cover the cost of acquisition. Yes. But, you know, this, when you're looking at my inventory, it's a function of accretion to where we're laying down sedimentary layers year after year after year after year of more and more books. And that's what we want to do. And there is no end to this. This is not as though it has some sort of immediacy or financial recompense. At this point, you know, the fewer books I sell in a given day, kind of the happier I am, because that means whatever collections are coming in the door are a net gain. And I tell people, and this is the God's honest truth, there is not a day that we close the store that we don't have more comic books at the end of the day than what we had when we opened. Every single day. And I you know, I used to drive my bankers crazy because they said, no, you got to make money. And I'd say, no, comics are better than money. Okay. It was the Freewheelin' Franklin thing, you know, where you know, dope will get you through times of no money better than money will get you through times of no dope. Well, comics will get you through times of no money better than money will get you through times of no comics. Okay. And that has been my mantra. And, you know, the fact that, you know, having grown up so poor, that turned me into this uber hoarder. I mean, think about it for a second. I mean, you got to think about this. Okay. This is a big planet and there's 8 billion people on this planet. How many of those 8 billion people can say that they personally, not through a corporation or anything else, they themselves own 10 million distinct tangible objects? I can, and I don't know of anyone else who can. You know? Think about it. Think about have you ever tried to count to 10 million? I mean, have you ever tried to count to 10,000? I had to move all those bitches that are behind you, okay? It took me 100 truckloads, big trucks, 100 truckloads to move my comics and my shelving from my 56th Avenue building when I sold it into Jason Street. I had to pick up those boxes. And I really gained a sense of respect for what a million means. When you are moving 1 million comics, you are moving 3,300 long boxes.
Well, so let's talk about location first for just a second. Then we'll wrap up our retail chat. And we got some comments. We'll do some viewer Q&A, and then we'll get out of here. Your location, you just talked about the store you've closed. You've had multiple stores, multiple locations. You've had fancy schmancy showroom stores. Yep. And what you're in now is not that. It's something a little different. So tell me where, like, if you were brand new and you were going to open a brand new comic book store today, how would you do it? What would you do? What would you be doing differently? No, you can't say. And you can't say I would find another Edgar Church collection either. So what would you? No. Yeah. So what would you do?
Bear in mind, okay, this is the thing to bear in mind, is that you know, the money from the Edgar Church collection by 1987 was gone.
Yes.
Okay, that's 33 years ago. Okay, so for 33 years, I've obviously been surviving on something besides the Edgar Church collection. And part of it was the Mile High 2, and that's a whole separate kind of story. But the basic premise is, you know, buy collections, keep some of the stuff, buy another collection, keep some of the stuff, you know, and so on. But what does this require? And the answer is cheap storage. More than anything in the world, if I were to open up a comic book shop right now, I would look for cheap storage, and I would try to buy it. Okay, it could be a piece of shit burned out shell of a building. And God, I know a retailer whose name I won't mention, but he has a building back east in an old downtown of a dilapidated little town. The damn thing doesn't even have a roof, but it's 3 floors with a full basement, and the second floor ends up acting as a de facto roof for the building. But he bought it for under $100,000 because it's in this dilapidated town, and each floor is like 20,000 square feet. He can store comics until hell freezes over, and it doesn't cost him anything.
Yeah. Because that's a key part of the equation, right? Is that if you don't have that, then there's a tremendous cost to holding on to all this inventory. And that sometimes has hurt retailers who lock their stuff away in a storage unit or something and pay years and years of rent on that thing and sell nothing out of it.
Yeah, even I'm doing that. I've got storage trailers that I've been paying on because when I moved from 56 then to Jason, we couldn't shoehorn everything in on the first go. So I've been paying for some storage trailers, and
temporarily.
Well, yeah, 4 years of temporarily. So it's the stupidest waste of money. And, they get broken into and shit gets stolen. And I mean, it's just, no. If you can get an older building, one of the things that I've proven with Jason Street is that as long as you are centrally located, fans will find you. Okay? Because Jason Street is in an industrial area next to the railroad tracks. It was a white elephant that nobody wanted until the dope laws made it so you could grow dope in Colorado. And that's why my building is so valuable, is that it's zoned to grow marijuana. And somebody could put a grow house in here and make a fortune.
That makes so much sense.
Yeah. But the thing is that if you're going to have a shop and follow anything approaching my model, which, by the way, right now is the best time in the world to follow my model. And I'll tell you 2 reasons for that. The first one is that print runs really are, in the aggregate, tremendously low right now.
Yes.
We're talking about underground numbers where comics are coming out with their first printing of 10,000. Yeah. And so you have essentially instantly printed collectibles. Comics are no longer like Youngblood #1. Which is selling, by the way, which is nuts. But Youngblood #1, Liefeld sold over 1 million copies of that book. And it took 30 years, but now all of a sudden people are looking for them and they're buying them. But today, you don't have to wait 30 years because every comic coming off the rack is rare. And so if you can buy them inexpensively and sit on them, think about what climate change is doing. New Orleans is about to get hit with another damn hurricane. Okay, Orange County, where I used to have my store, is burning up because the Santa Ana winds are taking this super dry fuel. And now they didn't lose a lot of structures there, but here in Colorado, we just lost a bunch of structures. Every time there's a fire, a flood, a tornado, that crazy thing that hit the Midwest, that giant windstorm, all of these natural disasters, comic books die. And this is a moment in time, and this is very noteworthy, and you need to think about this. We have crossed an event horizon where there are now more comics being destroyed in a given week than are being printed. This has not been the case since 1981.
I've never heard that analysis before. That's very interesting. So that makes essentially, for supply and demand, that makes it a commodity that should be rising in value.
Because there's a shrinking supply.
Exactly.
And simultaneous with that shrinking supply, we're also seeing an actual increase in demand, which I find very interesting. But as I alluded to earlier, I think that this is directly attributable to the diminishment in the number of entertainment options. People aren't going to movies. Okay, that $35 they used to spend on popcorn,
good point.
I'm getting that money. Okay, and so I'm killing with back issues right now. I've been spending my whole time during this recuperation from my surgery raising prices. Literally, I'm spending 8 hours a day raising prices. Now, my database contains over 1 million entries. So if I raise prices for the next 7 years, I'll get back to the beginning again. So it's not like I can affect, even working 8 hours a day. The database is too large. There have been too many things published over the years between comics and graphic novels and posters and God knows what.
What kind of database you running over there, Chuck?
I'm sorry?
What kind of database you running over there?
Well, we're running things off of a system that was designed in 1985.
Okay.
which is now functionally obsolete. But it used to power the Library of Congress because it's made to handle vast quantities of individual items. And in fact, the thing that broke apart our relationship, we had at one point a partnership set up for with Amazon in the year 2000, and they had 7 other partners and us, and it included people like Heritage Auctions and people like that. All their other partners couldn't meet Amazon standards. Amazon couldn't meet ours.
Yes.
Our database was larger than Amazon could handle because Amazon wasn't set up for multiple grades. Okay. Now,
Right.
we're not doing multiple grades. Like, for example, Buddy down in Texas is now doing a lot of his stuff where he's actually doing on a point scale. I'm not going there. I had somebody ask me that the other day, and it's just like, no, I'm too old. I don't care. I'm going to still use the old grading standards. And if you want books that have absolutely no dings or nicks or are completely perfect, go to Buddy. I don't want to hear from you. Because I'm at the point in my life where I can pick and choose my customers, and I'm going to pick and choose people who are reasonable and who are willing to accept, some books that are going to be super, super cherry pristine, but there's going to be some books that might have a nick or a ding. Phil Suling used to say that there is no mint in comics. There's mint in confectionery, but there's no mint in comics. They're produced on giant machines by indolent workers who could give a shit. They're not designed that way, and that's not my interest whatsoever. I'm sort of always have been the people's comic book dealers. Strangely enough, my average selling price is still below $5. So my goal is not to carry Golden Age, not to carry Super Silver Age or anything like that. But if you need an issue that's missing in a run, and you drive all the way from Ypsilanti because you're a big fan of Knights of the Dinner Table or some other relatively obscure but interesting small press title, when you come to my giant store, I'll have it for you. I might charge you double what you would pay in Ypsilanti, but tough shit, I got it.
Chuck, I love this because that's a criticism I've heard of your store before. People go, the prices are high, and you're not dancing around that at all. So I appreciate.
Hey, this is America. Right? Remember, America. Okay, if I want to take a stick of gum and say this is $5,000 and put it in a showcase, put some little lights on it. If I'm paying the rate, who's anybody to say? That's what freedom is all about, is the ability to do what you think is right. Okay, as long as you're not hurting anybody else. And the last I heard, nobody was dying for a stick of gum. Okay, and nobody's dying for a comic book. I got out of all other kinds of business endeavors that involved actual need because I believed what Ron at Last Gasp said, which is that comics are mind candy for the masses. Okay, I'm selling entertainment, I'm selling mind candy, and I'm selling it in a collectibles market where there's going to be rises and falls in demand. And hello, with our online, we sometimes get way the hell ahead of the curve. So you may be able to buy them for half the price in Ypsilanti, but they're out.
They don't have it.
When I'm out, they're half price too. Okay?
Yeah, that's right.
So that's the way the game plays. I got it. You want it. Pay my tariff or get the fuck out. I mean, it's not. I'm not meaning to be mean. Okay. What I'm meaning to say is that when I've got a building that's 65,000 square foot and they're charging me $110,000 a year in just my property tax.
Yeah.
That's got to come from somewhere, or else this really kind of magical place that I have that offers this phenomenal array of options that people can take advantage of or not take advantage of at any given moment in time. It only exists because of the policies that I put in place. So if I'm sounding like I'm arrogant, that is not the intent. I'm pragmatic. This exists because of our policies. If you want to support it, if you think it's important for it to exist in the world, then don't give me a lot of razzmatazz, because I really don't have time for it. I've done the numbers. I'm a real numbers-oriented person. I'm not getting rich here. What little money I do make, I give away a great deal of it. And so my goal is to serve you and to be here so that when you want that Knights of the Dinner Table number 63, the B cover, I got it. Okay, and
Right.
maybe in Ypsilanti it's $4, and maybe I'm charging 20. But I got it, and it's the convenience of having it. Now, if you and 99 other people walk out the door, but number 101 pays me the $20, then I'm still here and I'm still in business, so that when you come back on your next trip, you still have an option. And that's what's great about America, is that we have options. There's no price setting. There's nobody telling you what to do. You can do it yourself, but if you're wrong, then you also pay the price.
So true. You got the no risk, no reward. But, we've got a lot of people waiting in the comments. They want to ask some questions, Chuck. I want to throw it open for Q&A if you don't mind.
Absolutely. I'm good.
Okay. Let's Q&A this thing. Guys, if you got any questions now for Chuck, keep them coming. I'll go back through a couple of the comments that I've seen so far. And we've got greetings from the Denver area. I'm just going to quickly go through some of these guys. Drove across the country 2 months ago from Ypsilanti. And the first thing, next day, my first day in town, Mile High Comics, Jason Street Warehouse. Amazing. Chuck, any chance you may do a documentary about your origin story, a doc about the history of comic book collecting to an extent from the Rice collection to the direct market into the 21st century?
Yeah, that's a book. That's a book that's coming. And I think a lot of the writing that I'm doing on my personal Facebook page right now, and some of it I share on the Mile High page, has to do with how I came to think the way that I do, and what formed me as a person, and the value systems that I try to convey. And so, yeah, I want to try and do it. Hey, Danny, hi.
Oh,
I
Dan.
love you.
Cool.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I love him to death. Anyway,
good guy, friend of the show.
Oh, yeah. Well, see, I used to play poker with him and Michael Turner and all these guys. And we had a poker circuit going at the shows. And I still run poker tournaments at my place, but we did poker for years and years and years, and we had so much fun. And those are just magic memories. So, yeah.
Chuck, I'm a huge poker player. I want to play in one of your games someday. I have just now such a desire to come and see that Jason Street store and look for, because, dude, nobody's looking for weirder, harder to find, obscure comics than me, and nobody's willing to pay more for them either, so I'm not going to complain.
Well, that's the big thing, is if that's what I want. There's no comic book that cannot find a home in my building. Okay. I had the reason why I won the Defender of Liberty Award from the Comic Book Legal Defense Fund, and I'm the only retailer to ever win it, is because I was willing to, there's criminal counts out on me in Malaysia and Singapore. I'm the noted American pornographer, Chuck Rozanski, because if somebody orders a bunch of marbles and then they say, put a Bondage Fairies Extreme in there, it's like, sure, dude, whatever you want. I'm fine. I don't give a rat's ass, okay? And if they're going to put you out and flog you to death in the public square for reading Bondage Fairies, not my job to determine your risk. So,
hey, Sequential Geek says, Dog, your peeps helped me out 5 years ago with a meal. Thank you.
I'm so glad. That's what we try to inspire.
Randy Siplin, another friend of the show. Hail, Chuck.
Thank you.
Every day, Chuck. Oh, man, wait. This next one, tell him I love his sweater.
Oh, I got this in Alaska when I was up there I actually performed in drag up at the Imperial Court in Anchorage. And so I got this downtown Anchorage, and it keeps me warm. So my wife's too cheap to heat the house. So not that I complain.
Well, this is from my wife. This is from my wife, Lou Shaheen, who's watching the show right now and loves your sweater. That's me, my wife and kids.
Yeah, well, yeah, that's a running thing in my house. I having grown up poor, the house that I was raised in had no heat, no bathroom, no running water. And so I used to have to sleep in the middle of the winter with like hot water bottles for warmth. And when you're 4 years old and that that's how you grew up, you get kind of picky about warmth. You want warmth all the time. And so, yeah. So, but I love my sweater.
My dad's that way about food. You know, he grew up in kind of a way where he didn't always know where his next meal is coming from. So like that is just like foremost on his mind a lot of times.
Yeah. As regards to activism causing more violence, you know, that John Lewis has, and I have the T-shirt actually, that says sometimes you have to make trouble and you just have to make sure it's good trouble. And, you know, when he tried to walk across the Pettus Bridge and they attacked him with police dogs, you betcha that was violence. You betcha he was causing trouble. And I've marched in the streets and, you know, long before Black Lives Matter happens, I was out there supporting the Milestone Media back in 1993, when the idea of a Black creator-owned company as an imprint to DC was unheard of. And I don't believe in violence against property, and I think that there was a tremendous amount of extremism that I would never advocate for. But I've had Nazis stand outside my building and say that they were going to kill me and burn the place down because I wore a dress. And so, yeah, I think activism has its place in society, and you got to have courage.
Oh, brother. Just returned to Denver, and the amount of homeless in plain sight has tragically increased in the Denver area, as we were talking about. It just seems like it's getting worse everywhere. I mean, I live in a small town rural town in California, Northern California. I just go out to our town square, and I just see every morning the storefronts, just sleepy people sleeping, and then like, nowhere to go.
Yeah.
No, like, where do you go in that scenario? It's
you go is to
tragic.
Congress. Okay. And this is what I advocate for all the time. I'm kind of a Teddy Roosevelt independent to the extent that he busted up the trusts and he made sure that there was some degree of income equality in the United States, where the working people got a share of what was happening in the marketplace, and you didn't have executives that were making, 5,000 times the average wage of a working person. And if that sounds like socialism, you betcha. I'm a capitalist, and yet at the same time, I believe in enlightened capitalism. I think that we need to have capitalism where people are incented to work hard, but where you don't reach the point of exploiting the working class, where 10% of the people in the United States control 90% of the resources. I rail constantly against the concept of wage slavery. And I'm a businessman. I have to have employees. I have to pay them. But what I can't make up for in financial recompense, I give a huge amount of freedom and latitude for people to make their own decisions within our workplace, because I value the people that I work with. And that's not just lip service. It's something that really matters to me. But when we have large corporations where all the money is being hoarded to the top, I don't think that that's healthy for our country as a whole. And I think if you're looking at the huge schisms that we're having right now between the left and the right, income inequality is the source point of an enormous amount of this.
Yes, and then we're seeing these groups that have so much in common and should be like joining together to help solve that problem, that are turning against each other and being turned against each other, whether it's racial divisions or other things that just seem counterproductive to where like almost like the powers that be are happy that that's the scenario, because it takes attention.
Well, they are, because and it also keeps people enslaved. I mean, the tax code as it's written right now is made to benefit the ultra rich.
No doubt.
When even Warren Buffett is coming out and saying, Jesus, tax me more because this system is so unfair that it's putting too much of a burden on the working poor. Henry Ford was a dick. He supported Adolf Hitler and poured tons of money into his early campaigns. But Henry Ford said, if I don't pay my people a living wage, they can't buy my cars. And so he was a leader. That's it. There's
economic, but people don't see the economic advantages to certain, there is such a case to be made, for instance, for single payer healthcare being not single payer so much as decoupling your job being tied to your health care, right? What an economic booster that would be for the entire country. And because you wouldn't have to make these decisions based on like, oh, I could take the job I want and not have to worry about because my health care is tied to this crappy job that I've got.
Well, American healthcare costs twice as much as any other country in the world. Okay, that in and of itself says our system has some serious deficiencies. How they're to be resolved, and you know, America is a country that's filled with iconoclasts, and that's why we have these huge divides in people that wear masks, people who don't wear masks, and I see where that becomes the energy and the driving engine of a lot of our country. So as much as I might disagree with people on certain points, I see enormous benefit from that dynamic, that energy dynamic. But right now, we have a system where people are indebted the minute that they go to school, and they're indebted when they're buried.
Yeah.
Okay. And in between, medical bills and interest payments on credit cards are just leaching the lifeblood out of working people. And anyone who makes a misstep ends up out in the streets. And so, you're seeing an enormous growth in people living in tents and campers. So,
well, give me a break, Lime's dad says. Let's shut down forever and I'll die anyway of starvation and depression. Maybe someone will find my inventory with my skeleton and some cobwebs. What's your opinion on the shutdown scenario going on, Chuck? Like, where do you come down on the idea that if people are willing to take a risk, they should be able to open their businesses and that honestly, that there's almost as many bad consequences of the shutdown as there would be from staying open. I'm not saying that's the case or not, but that's kind of the argument. What's your take on that?
Well, my take on it is that when someone is taking a risk and it only affects themselves, I got no problem with that. Okay. I love doing things like rappelling off cliffs and taking the biggest damn roller coaster I can find and going off the edge. Okay, I'm cool with that. I'm not asking anybody to go with me. When I go down on the streets and I'm dealing with gangbangers, I'm not asking anybody to go with me. But when you don't wear a mask and you're coughing your shit face off, okay, you're trying to kill my grandmother. Okay, so bite me, asshole. All right? So there you go. That's what it boils down to. You want your freedom? Stay in your fucking house.
I love it.
End of subject. Okay,
right.
And if you're putting other people at risk, that's a big problem. Okay. Always go by the golden rule. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you.
Okay. Jabba the Queef says the MCU movies created a lot of new fans. Imagine how well shops in the industry could be doing right now if they didn't push the real Avengers aside for the sake of these new characters that nobody wants. Chuck, there's been a lot of talk about that. Like, do you feel like in the last 10 years when Marvel movies have just dominated, right? They've come to ascend and dominate. Do you feel like the comics took advantage of that in a way that brought new people to the table to like reading those Marvel comics? Like, what's your feeling on the did comics capitalize from the fact that, you know, they took over Hollywood, but why didn't that translate to humongous gains in the comic industry?
Well, because they were targeting the wrong audiences, really. We have seen in the Jason Street store an enormous pickup in young people, and we are starting to get huge traffic in people that are, 12 years old and younger. And they're not coming in because of the Marvel movies. They're coming in because of Scholastic. And they're coming in because of the book clubs. And what we're seeing is an enormous amount of growth and interest in reading graphic storytelling through young adult graphic novels. And that is the huge marketplace. I think that by the time that most hardcore fans are watching the movies, these are people who have money and the ability to buy HBO and pay for Netflix or whatever. And so they have so many entertainment options. Comic books are sort of like the horse and buggy in their worldview. And so they're really not that interested in. And quite frankly, too many comic fans conflate their love of given characters with the reality of the characters are there to make money for somebody. Somebody
Yes.
owns that character. And whether it was Ike Perlmutter when he owned Marvel, or whether right now it's the AT&T guys and they're trying to desperately cover their interest payments and their amortization of their loans by somehow selling Superman books or the latest, Batman Metal or whatever. Somebody is trying to make money off those characters. And the reason why they keep taking smaller characters and blowing them up is because A, they're cheap, and B, they don't already have a pre-existing history that the creators have to work around. So when you're working with like a Guardians of the Galaxy, you have a lot more latitude than when you're trying to write Spider-Man, where every fanboy out there is going to criticize you to death.
Right.
And so what's the point? What I see the future as being is those 12-year-olds, because they're actually learning to read and love comics, not just watching them up on a screen.
Yes.
And so, who the biggest person, and this is something that you're not going to think about, but the person who created the entire young adult market was Jeff Smith with Bone.
Of course.
Because Bone was the first major comic book property to say goodbye to Image. He was being published, reprinted by Image. He said, goodbye, I'm selling the rights to Scholastic. I was with him at the Frankfurt Book Fair the year that he did that. And I sat down and I talked with him about it. And I said, are you out of your fucking mind? That's crazy. What are you doing? I mean, really, you're going to try and sell these at book fairs at schools? And oh my God, they sold millions of them.
What a genius,
and now Dogman has gone on from there, and there's so much more that has gone on from there. I'm really sorry to have to tell all the fans of the Marvel Universe this, but you are passé. Okay, you're the old coots, and you're circling the drain right now. And I love the characters because I grew up with them, and they're really important to me. But as a businessman, you were talking earlier about the different incarnations of Mile High Comics, and we never got there. But I've been in mail order, and I've sold out of the back of my car, and I've been a convention dealer, and I've had these fancy schmancy mall stores. And what I finally realized is that you have to adapt to whatever the changing environment is. And what I found is that right now my market is general public, not comic fans. Now, but here's the thing. Because I'm wedded to the comic fan market, what I do is I use the store to cover the cost of my overhead for the storage of all the great older comics that I carry for comic fans. But I get just as happy when I sell a Knights of the Dinner Table as I am when I sell a copy of West Coast Avengers. I mean, to me, I don't see any difference. Whoever I'm pleasing, if I'm doing a good job for that fan, and if they can't afford a near mint because I'm charging too much, but I got a VG and they're perfectly happy with a VG, that makes my day. I might only sell that VG for $1.25, but so what?
Yeah.
Okay. The goal here is if you make people happy, if you give good value as best you can, then people will come back.
That's right. It's hard to argue with that, Chuck. My last question I have for you before I got to wrap it up is what are you reading these days in the way of comics? Are you still keeping up with new comics, old comics? Like, what scratches your comics itch these days? I've seen some of your posts about the kind of obscure stuff that you personally like to collect. You want to talk about that?
Yeah, I collect mostly undergrounds. So what I'm reading right now, what I've got laying on the bed are 2 books on that are involving gay history and comics. So they're 2 trade paperbacks. But then I'm rereading my all-time favorite comic, which is the tabloid-size Harold Head comic that Rand Holmes put out. Last Gasp published it, but it was they were tabloid-size newspaper strips that were in an underground newspaper in Vancouver, British Columbia, that was called the Georgia Straight, and it was anything but. And it's one of the funniest comics that has ever been done. But Rand Holmes is my single favorite artist of all time. And so anything that Rand Holmes did, I'm a big fan of. But, bear in mind, I love Kirby. I love Eisner. And I collect them, and I have lots of their stuff. And Karl Barks, huge fan. John Stanley, huge fan. And so my tastes are very, very broad in comics. I do not read any new superhero comics. I don't need to. I have enough people on my staff who read them, and they bring me up to speed with what people are interested in and what's moving and what's not moving. And so on a business basis, I know a lot about new books, but I'm not actually reading them myself. Of that, but like March, John Lewis's biography, tremendous 3-book series, and I'm probably going to reread Mouse here real soon because, again, that's an underground, but it really transcended anything that's been done in our business for a long, long time. And I've got on the back burner a Harvey Milk graphic novel that I've got the first chapter completely done. And I had to stop because it was so painful for me to write, because in the first episode, I go into the Pink Triangles, who were the gay prisoners that were put into the concentration camps in Germany. And after I finished the first chapter and we had it all, we had the artwork all done, I just put it onto a shelf, and it's been sitting there for 3 years waiting for me to get the lust to go back and write the next 7 chapters. But I haven't given up on it. I still want to do that. So I'm still working on that. And then, people have been asking about my life story. And this same artist, I think, would be very eager to also work on that. So these are projects that I want to work on, but all of this takes time. And I was putting 30 or 40 hours a week into helping to feed and clothe the poor. And I'm probably going to go back to that in a couple of weeks when I get my clearance from my surgeon to lift things again. And so it may just be that these never get done. These projects never get done because the immediacy of need, when you are sitting there and you're saying, well, I could sit down and I could start crafting this story, or I could go out and I could deliver 500 pounds of food and 50 people would be eating for the next 3 days. These are incredibly difficult judgments, but at the same time, none of us can save the world. None of us can be there for everybody. And as you pointed out, the number of people that are homeless is growing all the time. So my greatest challenge these days is finding balance where I still contribute at Mile High Comics and still do a good job there. Finding balance where I still seek social activism and I try and change the world in good ways to the extent that I can, and without trampling on anybody else's rights. And then at the same time, finding some place to express me and to still be a person and not be so subsumed that there's no time left at all for my own aspirations. And so it's a difficult balance. And then, of course, the biggest thing right now is, how do we save the comics industry? How is it going to evolve and go forward? And I have my own paths and my own things that I do, but none of this precludes me from hoping, for example, that DC and Diamond can reach a reconciliation at some point, because that would make life so much simpler for comic retailers. And you can rail about Diamond and their inefficiencies and some of the bad things that they've done, but at the end of the day, it's more cost effective. And sometimes you have to be pragmatic and look at what's more cost effective. But that's just one aspect, okay? Trying to find ways to keep the publishers from cutting back all the titles, because both Disney and AT&T, Time Warner are getting murdered right now in other elements of their business. I mean, AT&T, Time Warner is laying off 5,000 people in their entertainment divisions right now, including senior vice presidents that are making huge money and have tremendous credibility, but it's a slaughter right now. And so what's going to happen to all of our entertainment giants when this is all said and done? The landscape is changing. Will comic books as we know them survive, or is the future based in Scholastica? If you can somehow buy and hold comics right now and buy them at a price where you can afford to sit on them, I honestly believe that there are going to be a lot fewer comic books in this world. Give it another 10 years from now, it's not even going to be that long, because so many are being destroyed. People don't think of the attrition rate, but remember when, well, this is hard for you, okay? But when I started out in the business, there were pulp magazines and there were movie magazines from the 1930s and 40s, and there were Big Little books everywhere.
Yeah.
These are things that I was selling through the Rockets Blast in 1970 and 71. You don't ever see them anymore. And they're not all sitting in private collections. The truth of the matter is that a great many of those no longer exist. Through the caprice of circumstance, they have been destroyed. And I see that happening with comic books right now. The print runs are way lower, but the destruction rate is constant. And that's why I made that statement earlier, that there are more comics being destroyed right now than are being printed. And that is a really critical thing to note if you're going to be in this on the long haul. New comics may not be here that much longer. Critical mass is being eroded.
I could easily see a future where comics become a thing that you buy in a bookstore in graphic novel form.
Right.
I was going to recommend a book to you that I read this year. One of my favorite books this year has been Joe Sacco's new book, Paying the Land.
Okay,
it's one that
I'd like to see it.
Joe
Sacco is really good.
Oh, you want to take a look, Chuck? If you got a second still, we could take a look. Wait a minute, let's take a look. Where are we going to take a look, Chuck? We're going to take a look in what we call the $1 Million Comics Camp.
Aha.
Okay, man. Oh, $1 Million Comics Camp. Holy moly, are you kidding me? This is the greatest thing since, I don't know, sliced bread. 2 books that I got this week, and I'm going to be taking these in for a longer, more thorough review in an upcoming show. I'm going to start reading a graphic novel every day and just reviewing them on the show. I got this. This is old, but it's new. From Hell, the color edition hardcover, colored by Eddie Campbell, the original artist. Wonderful stuff. But Paying the Land by Joe Sacco. I gave this one to my beautiful and talented wife to read, and she just could not get enough of it. It's sort of all about First Nations folks in Canada and sort of their struggle to stay true to their roots, but modernize and everything else. It's done in Sacco's documentary style.
Cool. I want to read it.
It's fantastic. I don't hear too many people talking about it, but it's really great.
Okay.
Cool. So anyway, we'll be talking about that in an upcoming episode of Comic Book News coming soon. And Chuck, I want to thank you, and I hope that you will think about coming back again sometime, maybe for a panel or maybe just for another chat with us.
Hey, if there's enough demand and if people want to hear my stuff, I'll gladly share. My goal when I do come on shows like this is to try and help. Okay. I'm sometimes very provocative and I cuss way too much, but at the same time, my goal is to stimulate thought. Okay, whether you agree with me or you disagree with me, I'll confront you and I'll make you think about things. And then if you want to dismiss me after that, all the power to you. Okay, everybody's entitled to their opinion, and I'm good with that. But after 50 years, I've been going through my files because I've been recuperating. And it's like I look at these in my files and it's like, okay, he's dead. He's bankrupt. He's dead. She's dead. He's bankrupt. She's bankrupt. They went out of business. Every comic book publisher that I dealt with when I started is gone. And if you start looking at the Overstreet, look at the Overstreet sometime as an obituary page. Because every single comic book that's in the Overstreet with a few exceptions like Action. And even Action had its moments of hiatus in its numbering system. But what I'm saying is that the Overstreet is an obituary of thousands and thousands and tens of thousands of comics that were all the hope, the dream, the aspiration, the center of the life of certain creators. And they had their moment in the sun and they died. I have now been around. I started selling comics before there was an Overstreet. And this may be the last Overstreet, the one that's out right now, because I'm not sure they're going to have enough demand to print the next one. They already dropped the oversized one, so that's not coming out this year.
Oh,
and
I didn't know that.
Yeah, so I may end up being one of the only comic book retailers who bookends the existence of the Overstreet. 50 years coming and going. And so I may not be right about a lot of things, but I had to have been right about enough to have stayed in business for half a century. And so, I have 10 million friends. If everybody else in the world is pissed off at me, I can always go back to my comics, okay? Because they'll still love me, all right? And that keeps me going on any given day.
Well, Chuck, you got a lot more friends. We got 18 watching right now. The number just grew and grew. It never dropped. People love hearing what you have to say. We got, again, nothing but positivity in the comments. I want to thank you again for coming in. And
sure, thank you for having me.
Yeah, anytime. If you've ever got something you want to promote or anything, charity, business, or otherwise, please come to me. I'd love to help. And if you ever decide you want to make some changes to your website, you could talk to me too, because I do some of that stuff too, and I would love to help you out.
We'll talk at some point. There's
Cool.
no doubt about it, because
Awesome.
one thing that is a critical survival skill is always be humble and always listen, because you never know when that next phone call could be from somebody saying that they got a basement full of comics.
Yeah. All right. Thank you, Chuck. On that note, we're going to say goodbye. Thanks again. We'll see you soon.
Okay.
Oops. Oh, I'm sorry. I cut him off there, man. Chuck is a great guest, a great guy, a great person, a great business leader. I'm going to say he's a business leader. He gave you some advice. If you weren't listening to what this guy had to say and you're thinking about opening a comic book store, or you have one already that maybe you need to make some changes, you gotta pay attention to Chuck, because like it or not, 50 years in the business is nothing to sneeze at. Sure, there was some luck involved. Sure, coming into the church collection gave him some rocket fuel, but man, a lot of people get those kind of breaks and aren't able to take advantage and capitalize on them the way that Chuck was. And even more, those people that are able to capitalize on those things, those people that are able to come from humble roots and make it to somewhere where they don't have to worry about where their next meal is coming from, they don't always want to give back to those other people that were in the kind of position they were in. Some people want to think about, they pulled themselves up from their bootstraps, and so should everybody else. I think from tonight's conversation, Chuck's not one of those guys. He wants to help. So if you want to help Chuck, I'm going to put this up one more time. Go check out feedingdenvershungry.org. Let me put that up if I can. Here we go. Go check them out. Make a donation. Help them out. If you can, help Chuck, help some people. And hey, how about helping me, guys? Now let's get into some selfishness for a second before I get out of here. If you have not already, consider clicking on that subscribe button. Consider clicking like or dislike. If you don't like it, that's okay too. Also, hey, if you've got comics you want to send and see reviewed on the $1 Million Comics Cam, please send them to Comic Book News with Dan Shaheen, P.O. Box 1163, Arcata, California, 95518. Send them. We'll put them up on the $1 Million Comics Cam. I'll bring in somebody like Larry or maybe Chuck to take a look and give you some real advice and real feedback on your books. And that's it. That's all I got, guys. Please stick around. We got the closing credits here. They take about a minute. A little cameo at the end to make sure you stick around and look at all those fun credits. And who have we got next time? Nobody. I don't know who the next guest is. I haven't decided yet. It's not like I don't have options. I got a lot of options. I just don't have it nailed down yet. So come check us out. We'll have something or someone interesting to talk to when? Next time.